Okay. So first, before we jump into Proclus and the life of Proclus, we're going to look at one last thing from Iamblichus, which is the curriculum,
Okay.
right? Um, so and we one of the most complete texts that we have about this is in the Anonymous Prolegomena to the Platonic Dialogues. And there he goes. It's like this Neoplatonic manual about how to interpret Plato. It's probably something like student notes on this issue. And the student notes aren't that great, but we can overcome the difficulties. So let me read and comment. So this is the 10th issue is the order in which you're supposed to read the dialogues. And then he's talking about this curriculum that Iamblichus started, that Iamblichus instituted, where you start with Alcibiades and then you go to the Philebus. It's 10 dialogues. And then the Timaeus and the Parmenides come after. So the Timaeus covers all physical, like all physics, and the Parmenides covers all of metaphysics, all of theology. Um, let's see what he said. But the interesting thing here is that he coordinates between the dialogues you have to read and the kinds of virtue. So what did he say? The order of these is worthwhile discussing because the general practice is to lecture on these dialogues. The first to be explained then is the Alcibiades, because it teaches us to know ourselves, and the right course is to know oneself before knowing external things. For we can scarcely understand those other things so long as we are ignorant of ourselves. So this is interesting. We've seen the importance of the Alcibiades. It's the dialogue where, which is asked like, who am I? What is the true self? And there's an argument for it that the true self is going to be the soul, or maybe even the most divine part of the soul. And of course, then Plotinus and later Platonists seem to have different views about what this is. Is it the daimon? Is it our higher self? Um, anyway, and as we saw, like this is important for when you're discussing virtue because like what is improving, right? Who is the subject of growth and virtue? And so they established that right at the beginning with knowing ourselves. The last dialogue for discussion is the Philebus, because here Plato treats of the good which is beyond all things. Therefore, the dialogue too should come last after all the others. The Philebus also, it's about like what is the good life? Is it just the life of reason or is it the life of pleasure? It's the mixed life, but it also has the discussion of limit and unlimited, right? For which Iamblichus uh, was probably the first to put as principles beyond nous, right? And so putting the Philebus here and giving it prominence is supposed to be is also something like a correction to Plotinus, right? Because this is part of his idea that there are these prior principles. Um, those in between should be arranged as follows. As virtue exists on five different levels, natural, ethical, social, purifying, contemplative. Okay, so social is what we've been translating as political, and it's politikos, right? Purifying and contemplative, we've also seen. Natural and ethical are new. And what we know in other things, like natural is supposed to be things like um, when you say that I don't know, that lions have courage, or that you say that someone is born with a certain temperament that gives them an inclination to being patient or to being something like that. That's supposed to be natural virtue, right? And ethical is supposed to be those that you get from good upbringing at home, right? So it's like etiquette and things and that basic things, but not yet political, not yet in the sense of being a good citizen. Um, and but you'll see that natural and ethical, there are no dialogues for those. Right? He says we must first read the Gorgias because it deals with a social problem, right? So it deals It deals precisely with um, the discussion with Callicles and whether it's better to be have a tyrannical life or not, and what is just. And I mean, it's interesting here that even though he's putting Gorgias here as an example of political virtue, Gorgias actually has one of the is the dialogue where Socrates argues that the just man, even if he is being tortured, is happier than the person torturing him, right? And so, although the political virtue, like as we saw in Porphyry and Plotinus, is involved with being measured in all things and not in separating yourself from the body, this is already pretty extreme, right? Um, okay. And although, yeah. So the Phaedo, because it's the way of purification, right? We saw like Phaedo explicitly talks about purification. It's as this calls the virtues purifications and things. For the life of purification comes after social life. Later on, we'll look at Damascus's commentary on the Phaedo. Then we come to the knowledge of reality, which is acquired through ethical virtue. Now here that there's a sick there because that's what the manuscript writes, but the translator and editor of Vesta Inc. He doesn't he thinks that that doesn't make any sense. I mean, why would a Platonist say that it's that knowledge of reality comes through ethical virtue, which is even below social political, and so he thinks that the student who was taking the notes has made a mistake. He thinks what the lecturer actually said was theoretical virtue, right? And you can maybe imagine someone writing quickly making this mistake. Ethikos, theoretikos, who knows? But so after and that makes sense, right? So it's the contemplative virtue, like theoretical contemplative to two different translations for the same thing. So after you've gone from political to purificatory, now you get to the contemplative, and then he he says this reality is observed either in thoughts or in things. Since he mentions the Cratylus and the Theaetetus, and then goes on to talk about more metaphysical things, the editor also thinks that there's a mistake made here. It should be this reality is observed either in names or thoughts or things. After the dialogues mentioned, we read therefore forth the Cratylus, which teaches us about words, right, or names. Then the Theaetetus, which is about thoughts, right? And after that, then come the dialogues that are about things. Now there's a gap here, which is there's a gap in the text, the ones that deal with natural philosophy. From other texts, we know that these two that are about natural philosophy are the Sophist and the Statesman, right? They form a pair. And there's, let me finish reading and then I'll explain why they're there, what's interesting about that. Then to the Phaedrus and the Symposium, which are contemplative and deal with theological questions. And thus we come to the perfect dialogues, the Timaeus and the Parmenides. So much for these. Since, however, some authorities think that the laws and the Republic should also be included in the curriculum, we must also mention the theme of these. There are three kinds of constitution. The reformed state, the adapted state, the ideal state. The reformed state is when we mend our own evil ways and return to our natural and corrupted state. The adapted state, when certain laws and customs of the state are taken for granted. The ideal state, when nothing is regarded as given by tradition, but everything is common property, so that mine is yours and yours is mine. The possession of the individual are his own and at the same time not his own. The reformed state is treated in their letters, the adapted state in the laws, the ideal state in the republic. This last part about the constitutions and these other books is um, not exactly germane to the issue. What's interesting more is that these books, the laws and the republic, are not in the curriculum. And the most common reason for thinking this is that they're just too big, right, for you to include. And the laws is incomplete as well. Um, Although, and for instance, when Proclus writes a commentary on the Republic, he doesn't do a line-by-line commentary. He does these essays, we read two of them. He just does a line-by-line commentary of the myth of right? That he dedicates a line-by-line commentary to. But that's the 16th essay. Um, but anyway, let's get back to the curriculum and to the virtues. So when he gets to theoretical virtue, he starts with names, then thoughts, and then he goes into natural philosophy. It's interesting that here in theoretical virtue, when we go from the Cratylus all the way to the Symposium, there's something important here about these tokens, these divine tokens, these synthemata. The Cratylus will already start about the names of the gods, right? And the bulk of Proclus's commentary on the Cratylus is about that. Um, and of course the Phaedrus and the Symposium, the Neoplatonists get tons of stuff about them, but the main thing that but one of the main things that they get from them, from Plato's theory of eros in general, is that they get this whole account about divine madness and how these things on earth can connect us to the gods and things like that. So that's really interesting. It's interesting that these things that normally nowadays, if you look for a collection that includes Phaedrus and the Symposium, it won't be a collection that says the theological dialogues of Plato. It'll be a collection that talks about, oh, these are the erotic dialogues of Plato. So, but um, but of course, sort of theologically, the Symposium is about how what is the proper way to praise a god, right? And everyone is trying to praise Eros. And at the end, there's the scale. There's the ladder of Eros that leads to contemplation. And also the Phaedrus, it also has this focus on speeches, but it includes the place beyond space, the super celestial place, and so that's like a very important theological passage. So um, that's interesting. The Theaetetus, unfortunately, we don't have a Neoplatonic commentary on it. I remember once seeing Richard Taylor in a conference, this was 13 years ago, mention that apparently there are Arabic catalogs of libraries that include Proclus's commentary on the Theaetetus, but no one has found this. And these attributions often are like until you find the actual text, this can be a misattributed thing. So, so who knows? But maybe someone will find an uncatalogued bunch of books and it'll show up one day. So we don't really know what that was about. And now the Sophist and the Statesman, um why are they about natural philosophy? So apparently, Iamblichus thought that the sophist was about the sophist itself. And what is the sophist itself? It seems to be the agency responsible for transmigration, right? This thing about so apparently he like went through all the definitions of the sophist that you get in the dialogue and um, explained them as it were allegorically. So like this thing about him being a man who hunts rich young men is then translated into, oh, it catches these souls that are rich in logoi and binds them to irrational souls and irrational life and things like that. So it would be about this agency about the that um, works this less savory part of the Neoplatonic theodicy. There have to be wolves and so on. And then the statesman would be the opposite of that. The statesman would be about the thing in the natural world that is actually constantly bringing things to the heavens and leading souls up to the heavens. And Proclus's commentary on the myth of the statesman in the Platonic theology, he says things like this. So so together, like the Sophist would be about the sublunar world, and the statesman would be about the heavenly world. or the heaven, or and also like the effect of the heavenly world on the sublunar world. And then you see how like they would divide natural philosophy in two, and the Timaeus talks about both of them together. Um, and I wonder if there's something similar here with the Phaedrus and the Symposium and the Parmenides. Maybe the Phaedrus does like the higher forms, and the Symposium does the lower forms because it has all that stuff about reproduction and so on. And then together, but then the Parmenides you get both, and you get even more. Same way that in the Timaeus you get both and even more. And of course, the Sophist is also really important for the Neoplatonists because of the five greatest kinds. So it makes sense that you have that in the curriculum. Um, what does this, I mean, what does this teach us about theoretical virtue? Well, one thing is interesting is that like there is a throughout all of these texts, there seems to be also a they're not just theoretical, as we would call it. I mean, they have a strong role in virtue. So, like the Phaedrus and the Symposium have the whole theory of love and how to respond to the gods and control your passions. The Statesman, the Sophist, we would actually more naturally think about as stuff about politics, but and so here the political um and the theoretical go hand in hand. The the Theaetetus and the Cratylus um are not so clear. I mean, the Cratylus, as I mentioned, has all this stuff about like divine names, and that has to do um with theurgy. Theaetetus, I'm not so sure if there's anything. Well, the Theaetetus has the important passage about fleeing this world, and that is the um one of the main texts for the very idea of contemplative virtue, right? And because it talks about you turning towards a paradigm, and the more you spend time with a paradigm, you become like it, and things like that. Um, so so that certainly has something to do with it. And it could also be what's interesting about all of having, they have one dialogue for political virtue, one dialogue for purificatory virtue, and then you have six dialogues for um, theoretical virtue. This might indicate that there are many levels within theoretical virtue. And we saw something like this in and like it's six plus seven if we include the Philebus. And we saw in Plotinus that there seemed to be like space for lots of different levels of theoretical or contemplative virtue because he talked about, the person being able to return to any one of the heavenly spheres, right? As opposed to the later Proclean idea that you only go back to your home. Plotinus said you can keep going higher and higher, depending on your thing. And here we have seven things. I wonder if these seven were supposed to be somehow connected to the seven planets. Um, if if that were the case, let's see, what would that make it? It would mean Cratylus is the moon, Theaetetus is Mercury, Sophist is Venus, Statesman is the sun, Phaedrus is Mars, Symposium is Jupiter, and Phalebus is Saturn. Doesn't really uh doesn't really sound plausible. But anyway, there are in any case seven things about theoretical virtues that might indicate that there are many levels in this. Um, and so anyway, this is also like we'll come back to this in other texts, but it's like both the scale of virtues and also to stuff about the scopus and the subject of the different dialogues, um, especially in Damascus's on Plato's Phaedo, because there, when he discusses the virtues, he gives a complete account of like where in Plato you find discussion of each of the virtues. So, um, so yeah, but this is like a final Iamblichus thing to look at. Okay. Any questions about this or thoughts?
No, okay. No, not
Okay.
specifically here.
Okay. Then let's start here with I'll stop sharing. Um, let's start now with reading the life of Proclus. As I said, we're gonna read through the whole thing, even though, I mean, sure, there might be some things that are not so um relevant, and like the beginning is has this rather rhetorical introduction, but the Marinus decided to tell his life of Proclus, which he calls Proclus or on happiness, in, in structured with the virtues, because he wants to show that Proclus had all the virtues. He wanted, and so he says that of all the people who were famous, Proclus was the happiest of all of them. And he wasn't just happy in the sense that he was an accomplished wise person, and a wise person is always happy. He wants to say that Proclus had also all the material happiness you could have. And so it's a very hagiographic text in that sense, but it's a good, illustration of what the virtues came to mean by that time. So, do you want to start reading?
Okay, yeah. We're at the contemplate, right?
Yeah,
Um,
we're at contemplate.
we're to contemplate the greatness of soul, or any of the other qualities in Proclus the
Are you there? I think
and
your audio cut.
yeah, and is it going now?
Now it's okay. Now it's
Okay,
okay.
it's
So,
unplugged. Um, and Proclus the philosopher of our time. Okay. And again, the preparation and facility in discourse possessed by those who ought to write his life. And then again, to regard my own ineptitude in words, it would seem best for me to keep silence. Okay, that's like saying that, like humility kind of thing. And not to leap over the earthworks. Must be a kind of metaphor. But to repel the danger that such discourse entails. But as it is, I do not measure my own worth by that standard, but reflect that even in temples, those who approach the altars do not make their sacrifices from equal means, but some through bulls and goats, and other creatures of this kind render themselves fit for communion with the gods who possess the altars, and furthermore produce polished hymns, some in meter and some without meter. Others, by contrast, having nothing like this to offer, but consecrating, as it may be, a cake or a handful of incense, and making their orison with some brief invocation, enjoy no less benign a hearing than the former. So,
um,
yeah.
yeah. Pause there. I'll explain some things. So, Marinus starts off talking about his own ineptitude. And there is, of course, something conventional and rhetorical about this, but there were also doubts about like from Damascus in his philosophical history. He tells us something about the background of choosing Proclus' successor. And it was not easy. And Marinus was seen of many people as not to be Proclus's intellectual equal, and not to be the equal of like, and also he of Isidore, who Proclus originally wanted to make his successor, but Isidore didn't want it, and so there was this whole thing. And Damascus is very nasty about Marinus, like. He tells this story about Marinus, I think, showing his commentary on the Parmenides to Isidore, and Isidore saying you should just burn it, and things like that. Um, so that's like part also of the background of this is my ineptitude. And the whole thing about giving this speech, right? This is like a speech about Proclus that is give. It's like written as a speech, although it's very long. And the this is like apparently something conventional that you do. You write a speech about your predecessor, right? Something like probably it's a convention, although Porphyry wrote the life of Plotinus as an introduction to the works of Plotinus, right? And it's also like an introduction to his own editorial work to explain what he's done. It seems that after that, there's this convention. You do a panegyric about the person, about the last head of the school. And now the thing about the right, yeah, leaping over the earthworks simply just tells us is a proverb, and it seems to be something about going beyond the proper means, about going beyond your limits. There's of course in this uh case it seems that it's yeah, there might be something about, also keeping silent before divinity. And there's something like, oh, Proclus is so divine, it's best to be quiet before him. Um, and then what's interesting again is that he draws this analogy with this thing that Iamblichus talked about, right? Which is that people make many different offerings based on where they are in virtue. Here it seems to be also about like there seems to be a question of just wealth here, right? Some people can afford bulls and goats, and other people just give a small uh, bit of incense. But there is the same principle. Depending where you are in life in the ladder of virtue, you make a more material or a more immaterial offering. Depending where you are also in wealth, you make a more rich or more weak offering, or a smaller offering. Um, and and so there's this, and Marinus is drawing a comparison between that and saying something about a dead person, honoring a dead person. This is a question that's worth thinking about um, in general, because he's talking about Proclus. Of course, the soul of Proclus has given life to innumerous other people. We'll see later that Proclus saw in a dream that it was he had the same soul as Nicomachus the Pythagorean, previous Pythagorean philosopher, and it would give life to others. So, who exactly or what exactly is Marinus talking about? This is also a question raised by Proclus's own practices. We'll see amongst the ritual practices that he had was doing offering for ancestors. But if souls are always, and like offerings for ancestors are usually connected with the idea that somehow the ancestors are there at the grave or something like that, like originally. We call it, graves resting places and things like that. And it doesn't really match well with transmigration, right? So, and concerning transmigration, we know that this will come up again in the text, but we know that Proclus was buried together with Syrianus, his teacher, and that he wrote an epitaph for the tomb where he expressed the desire to join Syrianus in the heavens, right? So the idea that they both belong to the same planet or the same star, and they both go back there. Um, this might very well have something to do with uh with the symposium and things. We'll explain that later. But again, there's a question here about who is he talking about, and in general, what is the sense of these funeral practices directed at human individuals when human individuals don't really seem to exist. Um, anything,
Right.
anything else?
Wouldn't the answer have to be something like there's a particular level or some kind of how would we call it? One of those like astral bodies or something, which would be specific to a specific lifetime or something.
But that would be the dead body. That would be the physical body. right?
Yeah, but
Um,
we did say that there's like between lives, it might still exist. There's something.
right, something does exist between lives, but that's shared amongst many different lives.
Mm,
Um, it's also could be the case that you think that, a truly virtuous person, which is what Proclus is supposed to be through the for Marinus, is somehow his true identity is his soul. And so you can do a praise of him because his soul is immortal and he really identified with his soul. It could be something like that. Um, and that could be a question. Although then there are like more general questions because, cult of ancestors doesn't make a distinction about the virtue of your ancestors. Usually. You don't like everyone except Gerald, who we don't talk about. No,
mhm.
it's um and so yeah, I mean, but I think these are questions that are raised here.
I mean,
That
it could work just in the same way as you could say a god has many appearances or effects, and something like we praise him by the one we know, or something like that. It's like, uh,
Sure.
s-
Yeah, it could be something like that. It could be that if you were to press, the person says, "Well, no, actually, we're praising this soul that gave life to Proclus and Nicomachus and numerous other living beings, but we just knew him as Proclus, so we'll call him Proclus." Like
mhm.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
So I considered this.
Okay. Yeah. My thing keeps on going away. Okay. Um. Here, I considered this, and there's also like like you connected it to what Iamblichus said, but it's kind of weird because you would expect that the in the temple or something, it does make a difference how much how big your sacrifice is or something. Otherwise, like why would anyone do an expensive one? Like there must be some point to having a better one.
Well, maybe, but I mean, it could just be a law of proportionality, right? That you have the good thing is to give a lot, given how much you have, and so for the very rich person giving an ox, and for the poor person giving incense, could it come to
Mm.
this something similar? Um, Iamblichus would say, of course, that there are different synthemata, and so you'll be drawing maybe on different aspects of the god. And of course, Iamblichus would say that, of course, that the more material things and like burning a huge animal would probably be something less appropriate than just incense and prayers. Um, but um, but of course, he also has that thing about how you have to go through all the levels. So maybe if you do a bigger material sacrifice at the beginning, that's better for a more complete ascent all the way up.
Mm.
Who knows?
Okay. I considered this and was moreover afraid lest, in the words of Iamblichus, I should receive honor from men while guilty of some sin, not against the gods, as he phrased it, but against the wise man. For I was afraid that it might be impious for me alone of of the company to be silent and not to rehearse the truth about this man as far as in me lay, when indeed I had perhaps a greater duty to proclaim it than the others. And perhaps I should not even receive honor from men, for they will not impute my neglect of the goal that lies before me to any concern for avoiding ostentation, but rather to a certain idleness, or even to some more severe debility in the soul. For all these reasons, I felt it incumbent on me to address myself to writing an account of some of the countless excellences in life of this philosopher, and at any rate of the stories that have been truly told about him.
Okay. So here, he says, but if I kept quiet, people would maybe say I was stupid or lazy. And um, he's mentioned that, there were people who thought of him like that. But what's interesting here is that he says, "Me alone of the company to be silent." So he implies that there are other people, maybe writing lives of Proclus or talking about Proclus's life, doing speeches and so on. And he talks about many stories that have been told about him. And this is important because the people who received this text, like he was writing for an audience that all knew Proclus, right? This is written, I think, like a year after Proclus's death. That's also like suspicious. Seems to indicate that there was some hesitation on Marinus's side, that he took a while to actually write this, right? Didn't, you but uh, Christian Wilberg, he has this chapter on the life of Proclus in that volume, All from One, on Proclus, and he discusses this, that like there's something weird here about the delay. But anyway, it indicates that there was an audience who knew Proclus, and so although we'll see that there's like this is an entirely one-sided and uh, uh picture that only praises Proclus, he couldn't have gotten away with just totally lying because there was this audience that would have taken the task. And not everyone was, as loved Proclus as much as he did. Um, uh, Even like Damascus has this aside about how Proclus cared more about theurgy than its natural counterpart, virtue. Um, but so although normally, Damascus is very appreciative of Proclus and praises him. So even in this person that he thinks is like uh, a wonderful human being, he finds something to complain about that's also just part of Damascus's character. Um, but in any case, that's something to take into account, that the audience would have known Proclus and would have known many would have been students of his.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now he's going to start. So here he already used the word scopus in Greek, the goal that lies before me. And now he's going to talk about the goal, right? The scopus, which is, the title Life of Proclus is a later life, is a later title. The actual title of Marinus is On Happiness, right? And so this or Proclus or On Happiness. So this is like modeled on the titles given to the Platonic Dialogues, right? So the Platonic uh, titles like um, Republic, Laches, Charmides, Sophist. These are probably all from Plato, but then later, especially when they got the division into tetralogies, into groups of four, they got these subtitles like Phaedo or On the Soul and things like that. So these subtitles, and here he's done Proclus or On Happiness. So there's this he's trying to imitate that, and he's also trying to point out what is the scopus, what is the target. Right, remember, like the scopus interpreting a Platonic dialogue is the subject that you have to relate everything in the dialogue to it, even banal details. And so here also, he's now going to explain that the target is happiness. And so he's going to explain everything about Proclus's life in terms of happiness. So you can
Mm-hmm.
read the paragraph
So
two.
now, I shall begin my account, not in the accustomed manner of writers who plan the account sequentially by chapter headings. Rather, I believe that the happiness of the blessed man is the most suitable foundation I can lay for my account. I don't know what the other way would be. The chapter
Right.
heading.
The translator comments that we don't really have many examples of this, and so we don't really know what he's talking about. So, I mean, it could be that he's talking about it doing it strictly chronologically, which he doesn't because he doesn't really he jumps around a little bit. But um, the translator also says it could just be a convention of unconventionality. It could just
Mhm.
be so.
Okay. Yeah. Um. Okay. Four. I believe that he was the happiest man of all those who have acquired renown in many a long age. Um, I am not speaking only of the happiness of the wise, though indeed he possessed that in the most eminent degree, nor of the fact that his portion of virtue was sufficient for his well-being. Not sure what that means. Um, Nor that of that prosperity which is on the lips of many, though again fortune provided him with this as much as any man, as he was liberally endowed with all the so-called external goods. They're so-called because they're not really goods according to Plato, but they're called that way by Aristotle. No, the happiness that I want to speak of is perfect, without defect, and consisting in both kinds.
Right. So he'll say both kinds, both internal and external goods. We'll also see later that he will insist that Proclus exercise both contemplative and also political virtue, and also so he led the both contemplative and practical life. Um, the distinction here between the happiness of the wise and the portion of virtue that was sufficient for his well-being, it might be that the happiness of the wise would be strictly internal, and the portion of virtue that was sufficient for his well-being might already include the idea that it's a life that you would want to live, right? Because someone can be perfectly wise, but they have tragedy, like they suffer calamities, and so it's not someone that you would like. It's not a life that you would like to have. And maybe the vision for his well-being, and then prosperity then is like just the external things. So he's like moving from the internal to the external in this sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. Um, okay. So first, let's so there's all kinds of happiness. Um,
Yes.
First, so this is like different than there would be like a more like ascetic or like a more extreme version of saying like someone had no money but was happy because he had full virtue or something. And it's like,
Right.
no, he even had money. Or
Yeah. Yes.
um first, it's like yeah. Uh, okay. First, let us divide the virtues into their kinds: the physical, the ethical, and the political. And again, those which transcend these, the purificatory, the contemplative, and those that are called theurgic. While as to those that are higher even than these, we shall keep silence. So beyond the theurgic, because they exceed the human condition.
Right. So here we see something close to what we saw in the Anonymous Prolegomena, right? So there we already saw, so physical is what was called natural there, and um and we also saw ethical and political, there was called social. And it's interesting that there's so those three form a group because they're all prior to the purificatory, and so they're all connected to the body, right, in one way or another. Then there's purificatory, contemplative, and theurgic. So here we have clearly demarcated a something that's human because he distinguishes from what comes after, and that's beyond the contemplative. We saw that, Iamblichus in the De Mysteries puts theurgy here, right? Especially in book 2, chapter 11. Although, of course, and we'll see this is true in Proclus, right? You're supposed to pray and participate in ritual throughout your whole life. But in some sense, there's a perfect theurgic virtue, which is also which you only exercise truly, or you only have that after you've obtained the contemplative. If we think about what virtue is, in the sense that it's like this natural disposition to to act well in the right situation, it could be that until you've already mastered contemplative virtue, so until experiencing the world is a matter of, experiencing the forms naturally, maybe until then, ritual and prayer can never be something that's an innate disposition, right? It will always be something that you have to force yourself to do in some sense, and it will never be truly ingrained into you, even though it's something that's supposed to happen all the time. The same way that for instance, it's certainly, I don't think any Platonic philosopher, or maybe some Platonic philosophers would say this, but let's think about contemplative and purificatory, right? Will you tell people you shouldn't study before you have the
Yeah, I'm here.
uh, would you tell people that they shouldn't study until they're vegetarians and they're fasting and all that? Probably not, because one of the things that why you exercise purificatory virtues is like, I really want to understand these metaphysical claims, and I want to understand them in the flesh somehow. And so one way of doing that is to start purifying myself and participating in purificatory practices and so on. But it could be that the case that, until you have gone through separate yourself from the body, that there contemplation will never be as natural, will never become an ingrained virtue, right? In that way. So that's one way maybe of understanding these steps, right? And this stepwise presentation. And then he says, that there are some that are even beyond the theurgic. And so this might be something like there's some confusion about what these are. Porphyry and Plotinus seem to reserve some virtues just for nous, right? And because those are actually the paradigms of virtue. It could be that what Marinus is talking about. There's a problem though, because paradigmatic virtue seems to be sometimes used for theurgic virtue, like in Olympiodorus's text. We'll see that then. But here there's just a question here about what that could be, that these higher than that. But anyway, it's clear that for Marinus, there's a clear step beyond the contemplative here, and it's been inserted into the scale of virtues. Interesting also that in Iamblichus's curriculum, that's not there yet, like in the ordering of the dialogues. Although you could say, since the theory of theurgy is built on the theory of love, that in some sense the Symposium and the Phaedrus would be about theurgic virtue. Um, but okay, now he's going to start with those with the natural ones.
Okay. Yeah. Where am I? We should take the more natural ones as our starting point. All those that dwell innately in their possessors from their birth were present by nature in this blessed man who I am praising from the day when he was born. The vestiges of these were visible even in his final and shell-like covering.
That's that's our body. That's
Meaning
the
he was able, uh, like, he had virtues in his body. First was the outstanding keenness of sense, which they call indeed the wisdom of the body. Who calls that? I don't know.
right. But the point here is like he's going through the cardinal virtues, and he wants to show that they exist in the body as well. And so, what corresponds to wisdom in the body is to having keen senses, right? To having acute hearing and sight, things like that.
Okay, so just like senses, which are something we could call it wisdom of the body. And especially of the more honorable senses, sight and hearing, right? Because touch and taste are supposed to be worse senses because animals do them or something like that.
Um,
Um,
because
well,
animals,
people produce
yeah,
things.
because animals do them because you have to actually be in contact with the thing. It's less like contemplation. It's less like thought because hearing and sight are more like thought because you do it at a distance. They also you read and you listen to words, and so sight and hearing give you access to words, to reason. Of course, well, if you have Braille, then also touch does. But um, in any case, these are, yeah, and also, of course, sight lets you see the stars, right? Sight lets you see the most divine things around, right?
Hmm. Right. Um, um, so that's so and the ones who have the ones that have been given for the purpose of philosophy and to produce good relations with both human beings and with the gods. This man retained them unimpaired through the whole of his life. Okay, that's like
Right.
saying he didn't wasn't hard of hearing or
He wasn't hard of hearing. He didn't need glasses. Who
okay.
knows? Maybe he had a perfect ear, and he could tell a note just by hearing it. And things like
Okay. Second was strength of the body, impervious to extremes of cold and heat, not vitiated even by his mean and negligent diet, or the labors that he endured night and day, prayerful even when he was meditating or writing down his doctrines, and also in the presence of his companions, each of whom he treated so attentively that he seemed to have no other business. Power of this kind one might reasonably style the fortitude of the body. Yeah,
right.
this
So
is like
fortitude, another translation for
courage.
Andrea, for courage. Yeah. And so yeah, this theme about Proclus's diet. First time it's mentioned, it's going to come up a couple of other times. Everyone was worried about this, and it seems like he died because he was so ascetic. Like he could have survived his last illness, but
So then he
he,
didn't have perfect strength of the body.
well, we'll see. Everyone has to die, even
Oh,
people with perfect strength of body. But, uh, and this whole thing about how much he works, it'll also come up again. But yeah, he's saying, he had just this natural constitution that even though he didn't care about his body, he managed because he was like always focused on other people or working and or praying, and that even then, he only died at 75 or something. Another thing that occurred to me about the wisdom is the opening of Aristotle's Metaphysics, right? That all men by nature desire wisdom, and a sign of this is the pleasure they have from the senses, and especially sight, right? So that would be, as it were, a precedent for seeing keen sight, because Aristotle says, the thing about sight is that how, like it gives us so many differences, right? So the fact that you can see something very distinctly in all its different parts, that's like a beginning of wisdom. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the strength or courage,
Right.
I guess. Okay. The third virtue of the body that pertained to him was that which corresponds to temperance. Oh, this is going annoying. People think that discern this in bodily beauty, and with a good reason. Interesting. So the courage thing he said he made up himself, but these other one people already said that the temperance of the body is beauty. For just as temperance is discerned in the harmony and agreement of the soul's powers, so too the beauty in body is seen in a certain symmetry of its functioning parts. The problem with temperance is weird because temperance is something like control of the body.
Right. But yeah, and in the Republic, it's something like that the appetites are naturally obedient to the thumos and the reasoning part. And so it's the idea that the lower things obey the higher things. There could be, one way he's giving here the idea that, well, it has to do with symmetry and beauty of body as symmetry. Another way of thinking about it too would also be, well, if it's obedience of the lower things to the higher things, and the soul is by nature beautiful, then a body that's beautiful is naturally obedient to its soul, right? And so it's showing its temperance by being beautiful. That's not the way he takes it here. But here it's more this idea of symmetry. Um,
Hmm. He was lovely indeed to behold, for not only did he fully possess that symmetry, but also that's one thing, like the having symmetrical organs or things like that, but also the force of his soul blooming in his body like a living light produced an astonishing radiance which it is scarcely possible to convey in words.
Right.
Okay.
So there's something similar to this in the life of Plotinus, where one of the people listening to Plotinus sees like a kind of halo around him, and they're like shocking. Although, of course, and this is a contrast to the life of Plotinus, right? Because the life of Plotinus starts with Porphyry apologizing for writing the life, because Plotinus did not want portraits of his maid, right? Explicitly. There's no such concern about that here in Marinus, and on the contrary, he's trying to give as thorough a portrait and picture as possible. This, I mean, I guess you could correlate this precisely with this theurgic turn of that gives more value to the body.
Right. There's this thing of, so first, like, beauty is like one of Plato's favorite things, like in the Phaedrus, which is all about how physical beauty is supposed to lead you to true beauty and so on. And then we could have just said someone who is physically beautiful somehow has more of that God in him or something. But then the vision wouldn't work so well. Like then you would still not be praising the virtues of the body.
Yeah, yeah. So there are independent reasons to praise beauty, but here he has this project of finding the virtues of the body. And but that what you brought in confirms it, because um if the theurgic turn of Iamblichus is finding new worth in the body by drawing on these ideas um about eros and being able to connect us to the gods, then that makes sense why here there's this whole emphasis on Proclus's appearance, whereas in Porphyry's life there's this whole thing about how we shouldn't really talk about his appearance. And the thing about the soul blooming in his body like a living light, that I mean, that reminds me actually of a text of Plotinus where he talks about how, well, there are a couple of things here. Plotinus talks about how the soul is not contained in the body is contained in the soul. Right? This is from the Timaeus. But so in the sense that the life of the body, and therefore like its continuing existence and structure is sustained by the soul. But Plotinus actually has a thought experiment where he says, if you could see the soul, it would be this beautiful thing and you wouldn't even notice the body, right? And it would be contained in it. And Proclus thinks that there is this prior body, right? There's this body that naturally belongs to the soul, the astral body that is made of light, and that is something like what anchors us in the world, what means that our soul always belongs to the world, and naturally has its home in the stars. So it's what gives us a place in space in the first like uh primarily, right? And there's also space for Farkless is made out of light, is light. Um And so he's saying something about like that there might be something here about how there was something you could somehow maybe sense or see Proclus's astral body. I don't know his, and this also has to do with, this connects with the idea that light is space in Proclus and this astral body is light, because then one way of understanding what is this astral body is that it's just like the presence of someone, right? And that's, that would be also like a way of understanding this, that he was lovely indeed to behold, for not only did he possess that symmetry, but also the force of his soul blooming in his body like a living light, produced an astonishing radiance which it is scarcely possible to convey in words. So he just had this presence when he was in the room.
Mhm. Right. This is interesting because this is not like I'm thinking like even people who would never praise like the people they're praising for like bodily beauty would talk about this like countenance or like their face was shining or right, we have from Moshe Karan Panav, it's in his
Right.
face shine or something, and there are like these descriptions like it's traditional design. I never know if this is like something real or it's like people just a word for charisma or something. Like what is like because it's and it seems like he says like it's this soul, like it seems like something where you would say because of like these associations of the soul with light or something, like this is not really a bodily beauty. It's something like I don't know, some because that would explain why people who would never praise bodily beauty would say things like that. Like we're not I'm not saying my teacher was had a beautiful face. I'm saying his face shone, which is like a symbol of wisdom, but it's something supposedly physical, but maybe it's subjective or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Um yeah, also, so I'm reminded here of Plotinus on beauty, where he talks about how fire is the most beautiful thing, is the most beautiful body, because in part because it's so much like a form. And um so and remembering that for Plotinus and also for Proclus, the heavenly bodies aren't made of a fifth element like in Proclus, like in Aristotle, they're actually made of fire, the most pure and best kind of fire, but it's still fire. And they um and the idea is that light and fire, because it makes like it and like we see this in when a fire spread or spreads, right? It imposes its form on others, it transforms other things into itself. So, and it's also, of course, used in, for instance, metallurgy in order to give a shape to something. Um, so there's also this idea that also like fire, like in the internal fire, the internal warmth is what we use to digest food, right? And so to break food down into our form. So fire has this idea, and fire and light both have this idea of imposing your form on other things. And of course, this is something particularly appropriate to praise a teacher with, right? That they somehow impose their form on other things, on other minds. So that could also be part. Now this next clause is quite interesting connecting to this.
Okay, and then it says, oh, so beautiful to behold was he that none of those who drew him could catch his likeness. And all the images of him that are current, beautiful though they are in themselves, fall none the less far short of the truth in their imitation of his form.
Right. So here that whereas Plotinus refused to have a picture done of him because he was ashamed of his body, right? And that of course could be connected just like ashamed of his body and his parentage and his and things like that. It could, I mean, has Platonic basis, no doubt, but it could also be connected with the idea of like him being an Egyptian in Rome. Um, but here in Proclus, it's just it's he's so beautiful, and that's why you can't properly um, reproduce him. It's also interesting here that it says that there are many, or like there must be more than one. There are a few images of him that are current, right? So people were making images of him, or for some reason. I'm not really sure what the policy, well, like what the culture was about making images of people. Why would you make them and things like that? I don't know if it's like did students have images made of Proclus in order to have it in their house, and they have like an image of their teacher in their house? I don't know.
Mhm.
Um,
Right, but this also makes me think that this countenance or light that he's talking about was not real, because that's why you can't see it on the pictures. Like you have people saying this. I've met like thing like, yeah, this person who was my teacher was so beautiful, but no, the pictures don't do right. You have to be there to see it or something like. So basically, this is something in your relationship with him. It's not in his face.
Right, and also, I mean, that goes with the idea that this is like the person's spatial presence, right? So, because also like one way of thinking about these other bodies that we're supposed to have, like the pneumatic body and the astral body, is that there are things that you perceive, but that like they don't have mass, right? So, like the pneumatic body is easy because it's supposed to be the seat of the imagination. And of course, images and things that you imagine, it would be absurd to say that they don't have color or smell, because if you imagine a smell, you're in some sense experiencing the smell. You can say that the imagination, the perceptions of the imagination are much weaker, right, than the ones that we have. But they do have smell and color and size and things like that. And and then if you think, and so the pneumatic body is something like that. It's something also about like has to do with you meeting someone and they giving you good vibes or bad vibes, right? Now, if you think about the astral body, which is supposed to be this sphere of light, that's supposed to be, we could think about, that's a like as I said, perceiving presence, right? Which is not something that a camera could capture.
Hmm. Or cameras make too much of it, depending on your settings. No,
Yeah.
like there are like I guess the same thing to be said for painted portraits or whatever. Like it depend. There's like differences on the field and stuff like that. Cameras are not really presenting things the way human eyes see and so on.
Right, right. Yeah. And also, like thinking about like how would a painter do this is also, yeah, like the because especially when we're talking about like not like not something that's supposed to be super realistic, but also something with which, because often in portraiture we talk about how this portrait is transmitting the character or the style of this person, and so that relates to, again, how we perceive more than just what our eye gives us.
Hmm. You would say like, and then that maybe some painter knows how to paint that, but okay.
Yeah.
Um. Okay, so that's the right, and the thing with these things that it's not entirely bodily beauty anymore. There's these kind of things, or maybe there's somehow, but
Right, right. And again, it's this makes me think more of temperance of the body in some senses. Like the body is not an obstacle for you to perceive these things, whereas normally the
mm,
body is an obstacle.
okay, I see.
Yeah.
So something like someone, but this would be part of like the physical makeup of the body. Like someone who is ugly or something, or his body is disproportionate, would have a harder time seeing the forms for some reason, or the harder time controlling themselves. Not sure.
No, no. I think the idea is like someone who is ugly or his body is just disproportionate. In his body is he has intemperance of body in the sense that we can't see the form, the soul in the body as clearly, right?
Okay.
So like I remember a friend talking about how he had a friend whose face was like quite literally disfigured, and I mean, and his the point of his telling this anecdote was like how at first that can be like be something shocking, but after a while living with like talking with someone like this, you don't even notice it anymore, right? Because you just relate them to them as a person. But like the initial shock or something like that is indicates like a difficulty for other people to
Right.
see the soul and like that. Oh, this is a rational human being, like just like anyone else.
Hmm. Okay, makes sense. Um, yeah, because but maybe because like we have some like ideal image of what a human is, and someone who's like disfigured like seems not human or something like that. Right.
Right, like an ancient way would say, like the form did not manage to master the matter completely. Right.
Hmm.
Something like
Okay. Fourthly, people are inclined to make health the analog to justice and the soul. So this is again something that people do, saying that the former two,
Right.
Plato does this, doesn't he? Saying that the former
Plato
two
does
is a
this.
kind of justice in the body as the latter is in the soul. Because the justice is just like the balance or the correct things being governed and governing. For the habit of exercising the parts of the soul with the least of discord is nothing else than justice. While the sons of Asclepius also give the name of health to that which produces orderly and agreeable cooperation in the disorderly elements of the body.
Right. Oh, here, um, just to distinguish between justice and temperance, because temperance uses the word symmetry, and we talked about and so both of them seem to be relations between things. But here in the case of health, it's each organ doing its own task. Whereas symmetry has to do with proportion and with things be receiving a measure, right? They have a common measure that's used. So that's the idea of that would be the distinction. So to speak, temperance has to do with quantity because it has to do with everything following a certain measure, being symmetrical in that sense, whereas justice is something more about more about the quality, the essence of things, each thing doing what it's supposed to.
Yeah. So health is a similar to justice or analogous to justice in the body. And so beautiful. So then he talks about Proclus. So beautifully fashioned in him was this from his infancy that he was able to say how often his body has succumbed to illness. A matter of only 2 or 3 times in a long life of fully 75 years. Um, a sufficient
Right.
indication of this, to which I myself was witness in his mortal illness, is that he was quite unable to determine what kind of suffering pertained to the body, as he himself had so little experience of them. Hmm.
Okay, so there's a note here about the full 75 years because Marinus also said like this is all about how he had all the virtues from birth, right? And at the end of the life, he presents Proclus's natal chart. There are some problems with the text and so on, but as far as we can fix the text, and Marinus gives us a date for his death, it seems like he only lived 72 years
Hmm.
or 73. And so it's unclear, is there something wrong in the natal chart at the end, or or is Marinus choosing the number 75 because it works very well, right? Because it's like round and symbolic. At the end that he does some symbolism uh,
Hmm.
with the number. So people usually think that the natal chart is correct and uh, Marinus is rounding. So but it's an issue with this text. This stuff
That is
about how
considered to be like the full life, like 70 years is.
yeah, yeah. So the typical idea is that he was born in 412 and he died in 485. Um, the Common Era. Um, and this stuff about how inexperienced he was, that he couldn't really uh, know, he couldn't even describe his illness in some sense. This is, of course, a bit in tension with him having such keen senses.
Hmm.
Um, and also, but it reminds us, so like in the Parmenides commentary, he has this an aside about how in order for you to do theology, you don't need a lot of life experience. What you need to do is study science. You need to study mathematics and so on, because mathematics will give you these contradictory ideas, like the fact that the diagonal is incommensurable with the side, or that the point or the unit is like the smallest thing, but also the origin of everything else. And it's these kinds of contradictions or paradoxes that will then teach you how to think about the gods later. Um, but so there was this theme that you don't really need life experience is something that we see in Proclus's texts.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
yeah,
But he's just saying he was never sick, basically,
he was
or
very
only
rarely
two
sick.
or three
Yeah,
times.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So those are the four natural virtues, right? So justice is being healthy, temperance is being beautiful, courage is being strong, right? And that's being strong in the sense of being able to endure lots of pain or suffering, and then wisdom is having keen senses.
Hmm. Okay. And even if these be only bodily assets, one might nonetheless call them harbingers of the several forms of perfect virtue. In any case, the prime attributes of soul were innate in him, spontaneously and without instruction. And one can only marvel to see how these parts of virtue were identical with those that Plato proposes as the elements of the philosophic nature. So these are like more intellectual things. For he had a
Right.
good
These are
memory.
he's Yeah, so these next things, good memory, learned easily, noble, gracious. He's talking about that description of the philosopher in the Republic, where he compares him to a dog that can, easily recognize friends from enemies, uh, and other things like that. So,
Okay. Um, and so good memory, learned easily, was noble and gracious, and showed a love and affinity for truth, justice, fortitude, and temperance.
right,
4. He never gave way willingly to mendacity, which he greatly abhorred, preferring guilelessness and truth. Indeed, this is interesting. One who means to apprehend the truth about reality must take this his must make this his goal from earliest infancy, since truth is a source of all good things for the gods and also for humanity.
right. Um, so yeah, this idea that it's better to be tricked than to be experienced in lying, and then experienced in catching out trickery. So guilelessness is preferred. Um, Also, before when he says truth, justice, fortitude, and temperance, truth has replaced wisdom here in the typical sequence of virtues. But then we see that because he wants to talk about specifically truth as opposed to lying. And um, yeah, now as um, yeah,
Uh, okay, is this some so this is like a natural this is something like what we would call a naive kind of person. Like there are people
yeah,
like sincere or over sincere or something like that.
it seems something like that. Yeah. Um,
Um,
and that would, yeah, I don't think, and since he's talking here about something, he's still talking about the natural virtues. He's probably not talking about. I mean, he's also mentioning it as like a later policy in life, but it seems that he was also like uh, naive in this sense. Or I remember, so Stephen Fry talks about in his biography. I remember he talked about this case where he and some friends lied about a another student's age so that he could participate in the theater group. And then when the theater director found this out, he was like, "Hold, he lied? You lied?" And it seems like kind of like there's that kind of disposition where like you're just shocked that other people would even lie.
right. Yeah. And then there's like a and this is claimed to be because truth is what philosophy is all about. So this is like a good
Yeah,
um condition to have, right? As proof of his superiority. So that's one thing. As proof to his superiority to pleasures of the body and his outstanding love of temperance, I think it is sufficient to mention only his intense predilection and zeal for mathematics and everything of the kind. These pursuits do not allow creaturely and vulgar pleasure to arrive even as the outset, but have the power to implant felicity in the essence of the soul.
right. So in Proclus's on Providence, he talks about how and studying mathematics corresponds to purificatory virtue. And so it separates you from the body because it's just the soul enjoying itself. We know that Proclus, indeed, he greatly values mathematics. I just mentioned his mention of this in the Parmenides commentary, but of course he wrote the element. He wrote the elements of theology and the elements of physics, and a commentary on Euclid. And he also had mathematical and astronomical works. So he certainly was this. Although again, I think Marinus is kind of looking ahead, but I think it's also he's still talking about like natural things, just that, he was a nerd and he really liked math, right? And so that was like
Right.
something for the beginning.
And the point being that people like that are somehow more temperate.
Yeah. They,
Someone should,
they have pleasure in less bodily things. Although in this, I had an ethics professor who really derided this idea, and he says, "Ach, I've seen people cheering at chess competitions. There's nothing pure about abstract thought."
okay. I mean,
Uh,
I don't, yeah, I would, I would tend to think like it's true that people into math tend to be bad at other things in life often. Paul Graham has this essay where he just explains that the difference between nerds and other jocks or whatever he calls them is just because you have limited resources, and if you're going to spend your time figuring out how to do math, you're probably not spending your time figuring out how to get girls or whatever.
right.
Um, but here there's something like more essential to that. Like if you're interested in math, that means you're interested in like abstract kind of things, and that's just a natural thing. But yeah.
Yeah, and like I guess if you're interested in math and you're getting your pleasure from doing math, you're not really you're not getting your pleasure precisely from good food or just gossiping and things like that.
Hmm. Okay. Um, these pursuits, okay, yeah, they do not allow creaturely vulgar pleasures to arrive even at the outset. So he's something like someone who's into math with even that in his youth is because it's I guess because you need to like sort of be focused on doing the math and you won't be getting too much into these vulgar pleasures.
Right.
As for avarice, no words can say how foreign it was to him, since notwithstanding the great wealth of his ancestors, okay, he thought little of it even from his boyhood on account of his extreme love of philosophy. This is like the thing where rich kids don't care about money because they don't realize that it's important. Um,
Which is in Republic Book One.
right. For this reason, he was also a total stranger to parsimony and what is known as meanness, since all and everything divine and human was his object. Okay, this is like a mature position, something like since you're about
Yeah.
your object or goal or intention is everything. So like restricting what you have to one or something is doesn't make sense or something like that.
Right, right. So he had like a grand soul in him, in the sense that he had like this grand big view of life, incorporating everything divine, all divine things, all mortal things, and that probably then meant like he didn't, and so he wasn't petty, and so he certainly didn't count coins, right? Oh, what was it?
Yeah, this is like something like the reasoning for why gods are not jealous because they already have everything or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Um, the nobility engendered by this outlook made him think of human life as nothing. Okay, nor did he regard death as something terrible, as others do. He remained unterrified by everything that is dreadful in the eyes of others, simply because of this natural disposition, which it is not fitting to call by the name of any virtue other than fortitude.
Right. So this isn't, again, this is still supposed to be a natural disposition. It's not like the fortitude of, I don't know, loving reason and so obeying it all the time, or knowing that you're an immortal soul and so who cares if you die. Um, it's supposed to be something just that he doesn't take it into account. It's again, it seems like a kind of naivete, you know, of like not taking death seriously or something like that.
I'm not sure what this would mean. Yeah, this sounds like extreme. I don't know of anyone that's like that. It's hard for me to imagine like a child, like kids are not afraid of death because they don't realize that it exists or something like that. I get that, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Um, yeah, again, there could be, uh, we could take into account the fact that this is like a hagiography. Um, it's
Yeah,
almost time. Do you want to just
okay,
finish
my God.
reading the
Yeah, it's okay.
paragraph?
That's on. And from these facts, it is surely already obvious, even to those who is not acquainted with the fine nature of this man, that from his earliest infancy he loved justice, being at once just and courteous, and in no way a bad associate, a bad man to deal with, or at all unjust. In fact, he showed us that he was by nature a well-regulated man, no grasper and no miser, no impostor, no coward. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll continue from here next time. I think I might bring some background of some of the background that we mentioned for us to look at. But yeah, we'll continue reading this biography.
Okay. No problem.
Um, Next week, it's fine.
Let me check. What's next week?
Sure. August 3rd.
I have to look on the. I feel like I didn't pay you in some time. Not sure if we're up to date.
I'll check. I'll
Yeah.
check. Well,
Today is
yeah, I mean, it would be today for July, but
yeah, okay.
I'll
No,
check if you
next
paid
week
for.
is Tisha B'Av, so I guess not. So we'll have to
Oh,
skip. And the week after,
okay,
I might be away. I will have to be in touch with you because I think I'm going to go away the next.
okay.
So next week,
That's
no. And the week after, also, I don't know. Might be away.
okay. We'll be in touch, and
August.
I'll
Okay.
send you a bill this week.
Yeah, no
Okay.
problem. Bye bye.
Bye bye.